The man stealthily descended into the basement and scanned the area, searching for something. The next moment he was startled to see the woman kneeling on the floor, drawing strange shapes. Looking anxiously to the side, he spotted a bright red object hovering in midair. Although he sensed something very dangerous about it, the man couldn't resist reaching out to touch it. Immediately, a terrifying shockwave erupted. As the wave swept through, the little pug instantly vanished into dust. Meanwhile, the man in the basement was screaming in agony. Along with the receding wave, he was sucked into the object of light. The woman beside him immediately knelt down, clasping her hands in worship of the object before her, as if it were a god. Not long before, in 1963, the Umbrella Academy had made great efforts to prevent the apocalypse from happening. Later, everyone used the time machine in their briefcase to return to the present. However, they couldn't have imagined that in this timeline, Reginald hadn't adopted them. Instead, he founded the Sparrow Academy, introducing the members of this academy. On October 1st, 1989, a child was born. Like the members of the Umbrella Academy, this child was also adopted. The man sucked into the ball of light was Marcus, the leader of the academy. He possessed incredible strength, comparable to Luther, the leader of the Umbrella Academy. Number 2 was Ben, who could attack with tentacles. Number 3 was Faye, a blind girl who could control crows. She used their eyes to see the world around her. Number 4 was Alfonso, and number 6 was Jamie, who had a very close relationship with each other. Number 5 was Sloane, who could control gravity. Number 7 was Christopher, a mysterious sentient cube. Before Marcus disappeared, Umbrella Academy and Sparrow Academy had a meeting. A sudden cube of light appeared in the basement. Those upstairs were still unaware of what was happening. Umbrella Academy couldn't accept being replaced by Sparrow Academy. Therefore, when the two sides met, the atmosphere became tense. Clearly, they couldn't exchange pleasantries. During the confrontation, James number 6 spat a black liquid onto Diego's face. Diego didn't understand what was happening. Meanwhile, both sides stubbornly held their ground. So Marcus, as the leader, stepped forward and began dancing. Of course, Luther wouldn't be outdone. Thus, members of both academies began a dancing battle. After a while of dancing, Diego realized it was all an illusion. It turned out the black liquid Jamie had sprayed on him had taken effect. In reality, the way both sides resolved their conflict was still through violence. The fighting power of these new characters was anything but ordinary. In the battle, Luther was quickly overwhelmed by Marcus. Diego was also dragged around by the mysterious cube. The weakest character, Klaus, was forced to flee. 5, with his teleportation ability, temporarily had the advantage over Ben. Meanwhile, Allison couldn't defeat Faye either. The strongest fighter was Vanya, but she didn't want to use her full strength, so she was quickly knocked down. After a while, Allison was forced to use her speech ability to alter reality, rendering Faye immobile. Seeing this, number 4 immediately intervened. His superpower was to reflect the opponent's attacks, a reflex that caught Allison off guard. Fortunately, 5 arrived in time and used his superpower to get Allison away. However, immediately afterward, 5 was hit by James' black liquid, and he was instantly immersed in a blissful illusion with his loved one. It was for this reason that Jamie beat him up. Meanwhile, Luther was beaten to the point of being unable to resist. Sloane even manipulated gravity to throw Vanya from a great height. The Umbrella Academy group had no choice but to find a way to escape. On the way, Luther accidentally hit Sloane. He quickly apologized. There seemed to be an inexplicable connection between the two. At this moment, Faye released the Ravens to pursue the Umbrella Academy group. They had to continue their escape. 5 tried to go back to look for his school bag, but it had disappeared without a trace. At the same time, Vanya was left alone and surrounded by the Sparrow Academy group, so Vanya had to use her superpowers to protect herself. 5, terrified, teleported away. But the members of Sparrow Academy were not so lucky. They were all thrown several meters away. Therefore, they didn't dare attack Vanya anymore and let her go. Meanwhile, the school bag had been taken down to the basement by the robot mother. At this point, she discovered the magical light. She smiled contentedly, seeing that the light had been strengthened by the recent battle. A mysterious old man in the wooden house deep in the forest also sensed that power. He hastily packed his bags to flee. At this time, the members of the Umbrella Academy had escaped. They sat together to discuss their next plan. Because the school bag had disappeared, they could no longer travel through time. Moreover, they had traveled extensively in the past few days, so they needed to rest and regain their strength. Finally, Klaus took everyone to stay temporarily at a hotel called the Obsidian. They enjoyed their rare free time together. Vanya advised Allison to take advantage of the opportunity to visit her daughter in Los Angeles. After Allison left, Vanya pondered what she should do to deal with the Sparrow Academy members. Meanwhile, the Sparrow Academy members were reviewing the battle that had just taken place. After this exchange, they had grasped the strengths and weaknesses of their opponents. However, Vanya was the only only one they still couldn't fully understand. Sparrow Academy hadn't faced a worthy opponent in a long time. Number 1, Marcus had called Reginald to inquire about Umbrella Academy. Reginald stated that the Umbrella Academy members had actually saved the world from apocalypse in 1963. Therefore, they couldn't underestimate Umbrella Academy's strength and needed to prepare thoroughly for future actions. The next day, while Number 1 Marcus was training as usual, he suddenly noticed Vanya watching him from a distance. She proactively suggested that the two sides cease fighting on the condition that they return their school bags. However, Marcus refused. Therefore, Vanya was forced to declare a challenge to him in the main square tomorrow. She also reminded him by telling him about the 2 times she destroyed the world. As soon as Vanya's words were spoken, something unusual happened in the restaurant. Seeing this, Marcus had no choice but to humble himself and agree to Vanya's request. Unbeknownst to them, their conversation had been observed by Faye's keen eyes. Clearly, Faye and Ben were dissatisfied with Marcus's easy agreement to compromise. Meanwhile, the members of Umbrella Academy were discussing the current situation. 5 pointed out that Reginald hadn't adopted them in that timeline, so perhaps each member was living with their own family. This meant that each person had a different version of themselves. While everyone was discussing this, a knife suddenly flew through the air and hit Diego's chair. When he looked up, he discovered that the person who had thrown the knife was Lila. This time, Lila had come to find him with a big surprise: his beloved son. It turned out that he had unknowingly impregnated Lila years earlier, so he was now a father. Because of the time travel process, Lila had been raising Stan alone for many years. She now decided to entrust her son to Diego. Meanwhile, Marcus went down to the basement to find his briefcase, and that was where his disappearance began. Elsewhere, Allison went to find her daughter and received shocking news. Her daughter had never been born in this timeline. One day, Luther went out for his usual morning run. He didn't notice the crow in the sky that was watching him. It wasn't until a whole flock of crows appeared in front of him that he realized something was wrong. However, by then, it was too late, as he was quickly knocked unconscious by the Sparrow Academy staff. When he woke up, he found himself in the Sparrow Academy's gym. The people there didn't seem to mind. On the contrary, they invited him to sit down and have a meal. After a brief introduction, Ben directly expressed his suspicions. He believed that members of the Umbrella Academy had kidnapped Marcus. For that reason, they struck back by kidnapping Luther. However, Luther insisted that the Umbrella Academy wouldn't have done such a thing, but unfortunately Ben didn't believe him. Ben demanded that Luther stay in the gym. Then, Sloane took the initiative to strike up a conversation with Luther. Unexpectedly, the two got along very well. However, Luther gradually felt that Sloane was trying to extract information from him, so he didn't want to talk to her anymore. At this time, Vanya had nothing to do, so she opened a few books to read. Coincidentally, the book in her hand was about the assassination of John F. Kennedy. The book not only listed the 6 members of the Umbrella Academy as the culprits, but it also mentioned that Sissy had died on October 1st, 1989. When Vanya knew this, she felt extremely heartbroken. She remembered the times Sissy had encouraged and helped her to live authentically. After that, Vanya changed her appearance. The other 3 went to a restaurant for breakfast. Diego announced to everyone that he had become a father. The other 2 were also surprised. At this point, Vanya, with her short hair, returned to the hotel. She declared that from now on she would be Victor and live. As a man, everyone calmly accepted this fact, but they couldn't accept the fact that Victor had negotiated with Marcus. They didn't believe Marcus would easily hand over the briefcase. However, for now, they had no better option. Diego began to worry about his son. While shopping with his son, he unexpectedly encountered number 4 Alfonso, his enemy. Without a word, they lunged at each other. Clearly, Diego was at a disadvantage. Stan proactively pulled out a dagger and threw it at Alfonso. However, the dagger struck back at him. When Diego saw his son injured, he immediately exploded in anger and fought back against his enemy. Coincidentally, Jane was strolling through the supermarket. Hearing the commotion, she went to investigate. She intended to use her powerful black liquid, but Stan used a nearby frying pan to shield his father. This gave Diego and his son a chance to fight back. After fending off a few blows, Diego didn't dare attack again. He pulled his son away from the scene. Meanwhile, Lila also encountered trouble. She had intended to use her school bag to continue her time travel, but unfortunately it wasn't working. Annoyed, she smashed the school bag, but then she quickly calmed down and ran to the Sparrow Academy building. She copied Sloane's abilities and manipulated gravity to infiltrate the building. Meanwhile, Klaus came to find 5 and suggested they go on a trip together. Just then, the wave of attacks from the sphere reappeared. 5 immediately noticed that the shrimp in the water tank had disappeared. Despite this, he didn't think much of it and agreed to Klaus's invitation. The 2 quickly set off. However, Klaus's true purpose was to find his biological mother. Years ago, drunk, he ran to Reginald's office. There, he accidentally found his biological mother's address. After surviving 2 apocalypses, Klaus wanted to use his free time to find her. His sincere confession moved 5. Soon after, the two moved to a farm. 5 was afraid there might be another Klaus inside, so he specifically checked Klaus's health in front of him. After making sure Klaus was fine, told Klaus to go inside to meet his biological parents. Very quickly, Klaus asked a maid for his biological mother's name, but before the maid could answer, the farm owner came and chased Klaus away. The owner even used force. With no other choice, Klaus had to leave. At the same time, the ball of light emitted a shockwave. All the cows and goats on the farm vanished. Finally, 5 realized something unusual was happening. Meanwhile, Klaus still had no intention of giving up. He secretly went to find the maid he had met earlier to inquire about the situation. He discovered that she was his older sister. However, strangely, Klaus's mother had died on October 1st, 1989. This meant that Klaus was not born in this timeline, but he didn't have time to think much, as the farm owner had led his men in pursuit. Therefore, Klaus had to flee immediately. He and 5 quickly prepared their car to leave. Before he left, his sister gave him a book and reminded him to investigate thoroughly. Not long after, Klaus and 5 drove away from the farm. Victor and Allison were waiting for Marcus to appear, but he never did. Conversely, Allison began experiencing hallucinations. Feeling distressed, she decided to go outside for some fresh air. At this point, she noticed a mysterious old man following her. She quickly chased after him, but unfortunately, she lost sight of him after only a short distance. Meanwhile, the Umbrella Academy still refused to rescue Luther. Therefore, Sparrow Academy decided to release him. They not only released him, but also gave him some commemorative gifts. However, they couldn't have imagined that Lila was on top of the building. She had copied Faye's superpowers to control a ball of light and steal the school bag. As Luther stepped out of the building, Sloane called out to him. She used her superpowers to take Luther to her room. There, she confessed her feelings to him. Afterward, the two were seen floating in mid-air, passionately kissing. A short while later, the Umbrella Academy group gathered at the bar to study the book the maid had given Klaus. They discovered that their mothers had all died on that very day. This meant that none of them were born in this timeline. The reason was that they had traveled through time via a magical briefcase, which had disrupted the timeline and events within it. Meanwhile, Luther was overjoyed after leaving Sloane's place. As he passed the grocery store, the light in the basement once again emitted a shockwave, destroying even ordinary people. In a split second, Luther was the only one left on the main street. Soon, news of the mysterious disappearance of hundreds of people began to broadcast on television. Everyone believes all of this is related to the time paradox. 5 thinks it's highly likely a chain reaction of timeline manipulation. At this point, Stan says Lila is at the hotel, so 5 goes to find Lila to clarify things. However, 5 had previously attempted to murder Lila's parents. Therefore, as soon as Lila saw 5, she immediately attacked. Caught off guard, 5 was initially at a disadvantage. However, he quickly counterattacked Lila. Taking advantage of her momentary distraction, he delivered a knockout kick. He also discovered 2 briefcases with Lila. Lila revealed that the 2 briefcases had been stolen from Sparrow Academy. However, they were both faulty. The probability of this happening was 1 in 10,000, and the probability of a malfunctioning briefcase was 1 in 1 million. It could be said that this was a sign of the world's end. However, the reality was far worse. The briefcase was also affected by this paradox. To resolve the immediate troubles, the two temporarily set aside their prejudices against each other and sought a solution together. However, when they left, they did not share the information with the other members. This led Victor and Allison to speculate that the briefcase was still at Sparrow Academy. However, Sparrow Academy was in a desperate situation. They faced the disappearance of Sparrow and many other mysterious cases. In this situation, Ben decided to take on the responsibility of leadership. Faye also wanted to compete with him for this position. The two had a rather unpleasant conversation. They even prepared for a confrontation. However, after another exchange, Ben relented. The leadership role would be shared between the two. To find out the truth, they decided to go to Umbrella Academy. Thus, the two sides confronted each other outside the building. Sparrow Academy demanded that Umbrella Academy release Sparrow. Meanwhile, the Umbrella Academy demanded the briefcase. Allison lied to Ben, saying Sparrow was with her. If he wanted Sparrow, he had to bring the briefcase to the hotel. While the two sides confirmed the agreement, the old man followed Victor to the Obsidian Hotel. Meanwhile, Luther was immersed in the newfound feelings of love. The apocalypse seemed to have no bearing on him anymore. Diego had many things to do but couldn't accomplish them, as Stan kept following him around. Klaus was still grappling with the loss of his mother. He suspected Reginald's death might be connected to his mother, so he donned a wetsuit and infiltrated Sparrow Academy through the sewer system. However, Reginald appeared to have lost his memory. The reason he became like that was because the members of Sparrow kept giving him drugs. Each time he took the drug, he would be completely controlled. For a moment, Klaus felt sympathy for Reginald. He suggested that Reginald hide the drug under his tongue to fool everyone. Meanwhile, Five and Lila were trying to repair the briefcase. Five tried using the energy of the electric current to activate it, but he nearly got electrocuted. Lila suggested they both activate their abilities together. So, they combined their power to create a large amount of energy around them, successfully activating the briefcase. Afterward, they were taken to the time management gate. Meanwhile, Ben and Faye had also gone down to the basement. However, Lila soon stole the briefcase. They also accidentally discovered the mysterious light. The robot mother beside them then revealed the truth. Warning. Number 2, not to disturb the sleeping light. However, Ben walked straight up and touched it. The robot mother continued to say that the light of the gods was too dazzling for ordinary people. Then the two discovered they had been deceived by Sparrow Academy. However, they couldn't do anything about the ball of light, so they could only seek out members of Sparrow Academy to question them. Meanwhile, Victor asked Allison how she planned to find Sparrow, but in truth, Allison had no plan at all. She felt no need to care about others. By evening, except for Five and Lila, everyone else gathered in the hotel lobby. Soon after, all the members of Sparrow Academy also arrived. Both sides were mentally prepared for a fierce battle. Stan sensed the situation was bad. He quickly brought out his goblet of fire. Although Diego tried to stop him in time, the goblet of fire caused the banners hanging on the pillars to catch fire. Ben thought this was the signal to begin the battle. He immediately ordered the cube to attack. In a short time, countless energies erupted from the cube. The members of Umbrella Academy instantly lost their ability to fight. Allison tried to speak, but the shockwave rendered her speechless. Just as the Umbrella Academy members were about to be annihilated, the mysterious old man reappeared. His body emitted immense energy. This energy immediately overwhelmed the members of Sparrow Academy. Luther used his body to shield Sloane. Meanwhile, Klaus and Ben were not so lucky. Standing too close to the old man, they were most severely affected. They couldn't withstand it and fell to the ground. A second later, the others calmed down. Ben quickly ordered a retreat. Thus, Umbrella Academy narrowly escaped the dangerous situation. At this moment, Victor recognized the old man's familiar gaze. It turned out he was Sissy's son. His name is Harlan. He was saved by Victor when he was a child. Unintentionally, he absorbed a portion of Victor's power. Therefore, Harlan can now use some of this power. One morning in the 1960s, a student was being bullied by his classmates. That student was Harlan. Since acquiring superpowers, Harlan had been considered a monster. When his patience reached its limit, Harlan unleashed his energy. Things like this had happened many times. Each time, he hurt the people around him because he couldn't control his own power. To have a peaceful life, Harlan's mother constantly moved house with her son. Then, in 1989, Harlan's father fell ill with cancer and passed away. Harlan, overwhelmed with grief, unleashed a powerful energy. Returning to reality, because Victor fought and emitted energy, Harlan immediately sensed his presence. After Victor heard his story, he felt immense guilt. He regretted not staying in the 1960s to care for Harlan and his mother. However, Harlan had inadvertently caused the deaths of 2 members of the Sparrow group. Therefore, he could only advise Victor to flee for his own safety. Meanwhile, Allison was interrogating Sloane about the whereabouts of the briefcase. Although Sloane said she didn't know, Allison wouldn't let her go. Allison relentlessly tormented her, constantly asking about the whereabouts of the briefcase. Finally, Luther, unable to bear watching Sloane suffer, pulled her away. This action only angered Allison further. She felt like she was about to lose control. Finally, she resorted to using her mind manipulation abilities to escape her anger. The hotel had suffered damage from Stan's arson the previous night. Diego told his son to clean the rooms to compensate the hotel. Stan was furious, believing his father was shifting all the blame onto him. Nevertheless, he had to obediently follow his father's orders. Diego even asked Klaus to keep an eye on his son while he went out to play. After Luther and Sloane discussed the matter, he decided to let her go. Sloane also assured him that she would act as a mediator. Luther had also convinced the others. That evening, they brought Sloane and the 2 bodies back to Sparrow Academy, but Ben wanted them to hand over the culprit. Only then could their feud be resolved. He spoke as if he were capable of dealing with the killer, but in reality, this intimidation had no effect. Stan and Klaus approached a room with a water buffalo symbol. This room wasn't on the hotel's room list, but Klaus suspected there was something in it, so he pried open the door. The room was exactly as its name suggested. A water buffalo head hung above the fireplace. Klaus seemed to remember that Reginald's room had a similar painting. At that moment, Stan picked up his fishing rifle and tried shooting. Unexpectedly, he accidentally shot Klaus dead. bed. Hearing the noise, Harlan went outside to investigate. He was surprised to find Victor's diary on the table. It contained news about their mother's death. After seeing this news, Harlan became distraught. Just then, Victor returned from outside. Harlan grabbed Victor's arm, and immediately the two were transported back to the past. On October 1st, 1989, Sissy's death caused Harlan to erupt. During this outburst, Harlan thought of Victor, thus forming a connection with him, even though Victor hadn't been born yet. As a result, this energy transferred to Victor's mother, killing her before she could give birth to Victor. The mothers of the remaining Academy members shared the same fate. This was the reason they were never born. At this moment, Five and Leela arrived at the Time Management Bureau. The sight before them was shocking. The place was a pile of rubble, deserted. Finally, Five decided to check the surveillance cameras. He discovered a time rift, devouring everything around him. The staff here tried everything, but nothing worked. The timeline continued to break. Faced with the dire situation, they could do nothing more. Even the director had disappeared. It seemed this incident would cause the destruction of the entire universe. At this moment, Lila found a time management notebook. Inside, it recorded ways to deal with time paradoxes. When a time paradox occurs, the creator must bring all staff into the bunker to fight. But what exactly the creator and the bunker were, Five and Lila didn't know. They could only try to find out. As a result, they accidentally discovered a secret room that only Five could open the door to. Upon entering, they saw an old man lying on a life support device. But upon closer inspection, Five realized it was his own image in his old age. Lila laughed when she realized Five was the creator of the Time Management Bureau. Just then, the old man suddenly woke up. He also knew the purpose of their visit. Furthermore, he knew about the ball of light. Lila described it as a cheesecake. The old man said its destructive power was terrifying. It could even devour the entire timeline. Five asked them how they should deal with it, but the old man said there was no need to deal with it. Five argued that since he had created all of this, he must have a solution. However, the old man continued to advise them not to try to save the world. Before Five could ask any more questions, the old man breathed his last. He felt confused and didn't understand what was happening. Suddenly, looking down at the old man's body, Five discovered a strange tattoo. He cut out the skin containing the tattoo and left the management office with Lila. Later, Victor discovered that the culprit behind the paradox was Harlan. He wanted Harlan to explain clearly, but Harlan didn't want to say much. The two argued for a while, then started fighting. Because their strength was evenly matched, both ended up injured, neither winning. However, Harlan recounted the events. It turned out that at the moment Sissy died, he suddenly sensed Victor's presence, but he also sensed fear in Victor. That's why the tragedy occurred. Victor understood the situation. He had once been unable to control his superpowers, causing harm to many people. Therefore, he didn't blame Harlan. But Victor also knew that once everyone knew the truth, they wouldn't forgive Harlan. So Victor decided to gauge everyone's reaction first. When the group gathered, Five and Lila suddenly teleported in. Due to the urgent situation, Five immediately organized a meeting to discuss the doomsday situation. At this moment, Diego saw Stan sneaking past. He chased after him and found Stan holding many types of highly corrosive acids. After questioning him, Diego found out that Stan had accidentally caused Klaus's death. Now he was preparing to dispose of the body. Caught between his younger brother and his son, Diego didn't know what to do. After some deliberation, he wrapped Klaus's body in a rug. He intended to carry it downstairs and explain to everyone. As the two of them carried the body to the door, they encountered a hotel employee. Diego quickly explained that they were playing a game. The employee even said he hoped Diego and his son would win. While they were transporting the body, Klaus's soul entered the underworld. However, this journey was very strange for him. During it, Klaus discovered his hidden abilities. It turned out he had the power of resurrection. From childhood to adulthood, he had died many times, but because he was resurrected each time, he was still alive. He had never known about this before. Now that he had fulfilled his wish to meet his biological mother, he decided it was time to be resurrected. Diego and Stan screamed in fear, and Klaus grumbled, telling them to keep their voices down. Meanwhile, Five told everyone about the ball of light that would devour everything. Lila explained that due to a time paradox, the clues had been lost, and they couldn't travel through time to eliminate it. Everyone fell silent. Ben and Faye argued about Harlan's situation. Faye believed the situation was critical, and that they should cooperate with the Umbrella Academy to deal with the ball of light first. Ben, however, remained firm in his opinion. He wanted revenge for those who had died, and believed they had to kill Harlan before discussing cooperation. Finally, the two decided to go to the ball of light to investigate its structure. They asked the robot mother to take out her electronic eye to see what was happening on the other side of the light. Ben took the robot mother's eye and carefully threw it into the light. Unexpectedly, the moment the eye made contact contact with the light, an incredibly powerful reaction occurred. A powerful energy erupted once again from within the light. A massive shockwave appeared, spanning tens of thousands of kilometers. In just a moment, the entire city's inhabitants vanished completely. If this continued, they didn't have much time left. Ben now understood the danger of the light, but he still wanted to eliminate Harlan first. At that time, the Umbrella Academy was also discussing how to deal with Harlan. They agreed to hand him over to the Sparrow Academy. After all, he possessed extremely powerful abilities, and they couldn't control him forever. And at the same time, they could exchange this for a chance to cooperate in saving the world. Seeing everyone agree, Victor reluctantly compromised and left helplessly. He intended to persuade Harlan to confess. However, he hadn't yet realized that his consciousness and Harlan's were linked. Before he could speak, Harlan had already figured out his purpose. Ultimately, Victor couldn't bring himself to betray Harlan, so he secretly took him away. Meanwhile, Luther knew Allison was grieving the loss of her daughter. He hugged her to comfort her. Allison misunderstood that Luther wanted to get back together with her, but Luther's heart was now only for Sloane, so he flatly rejected Allison. Therefore, their relationship became even more awkward, and Luther quickly left. However, Allison used her hypnotic abilities. She repeatedly said that she had heard rumors that he would stay, and that he wanted her. Unable to control herself, Luther followed Allison's instructions, but in the end, Allison accepted reality, ran away, and left Luther in confusion. Coincidentally, while fleeing, she saw Victor leading Harlan away. Victor said he intended to reclaim Harlan's powers and take him away. This way, he would have all his abilities and could deal with the immediate danger. So Allison helped him take Harlan away, but she demanded that Victor explain this to everyone. As a result, after hearing Victor's explanation, everyone felt very disappointed because everyone preferred to act on their own initiative and there was no one left to lead. Luther decided to go to Sparrow Academy to find Sloane. Meanwhile, Five didn't give up on saving the world, so he pulled Klaus out for a drink and talked. To this day, he still doesn't understand why. In his old age, he no longer wants to save the world. At this moment, he took out a piece of skin with a tattoo and showed it to Klaus. Unexpectedly, Klaus recognized the tattoo. It turned out that this was the symbol of a local gang. With this new clue, Five went off to investigate. Meanwhile, Lila acknowledged Diego's efforts in taking care of Stan. The two were reunited once again. They did not realize that a door had appeared on the wall of the room. In the flashback at Sparrow Academy, Ben was fighting a girl. With his powerful tentacles, Ben quickly subdued her, even using them to cover her mouth. The other members worried that she would suffocate and urged Ben to let go. However, Reginald said that reality was far more brutal. He hoped that the girl would find a way to escape on her own. In this new timeline, Pogo also appeared, but Pogo's role at that time was that of a trainer for the members of Sparrow Academy. Clearly, Pogo disagreed with Reginald's viewpoint, which led to an argument between the two. During the argument, Reginald revealed that he was going to send everyone on an impossible mission. Pogo immediately objected, arguing that it was too dangerous and could cost everyone their lives. Reginald ultimately fired Pogo. Despite this, Pogo still cared deeply about everyone's safety. Before leaving, he gave Sparrow some mind-controlling potions and instructed Sparrow to give them to Reginald. As a result, Reginald became a gentle and harmless old man. This was the story of Sparrow Academy. Meanwhile, Five, following a clue from Klaus, went to a gangster bar. There, he met Pogo, who had become a tattoo artist. However, in that timeline, Pogo had not known Five, so he ignored him and drove away on his motorcycle. Five also stole a motorcycle to chase after him. Five pursued Pogo all evening until Pogo stopped at his house. Perhaps Five's enthusiasm touched Pogo, so he agreed to sit down and talk. Pogo then took out his tattoo design book. He explained that the tattoo Five wanted to see was a design Reginald had been studying. Reginald had even devised a plan called the Forgetfulness Plan. Only then did Five understand the meaning of the word forgetfulness that he himself had spoken of when he was old. So he asked Pogo to tattoo an identical design on his chest. Meanwhile, in the Water Buffalo room at the hotel, Diego was sleeping in bed. At that moment, Lila discovered Stan had disappeared. She searched the entire hotel but couldn't find him. She quickly woke Diego up to help her search. A little later, the two discovered a secret passage in the room. On the floor was Stan's lighter, which he always carried. They thought Stan had run into the tunnel, so they decided to go in and investigate. After going down the passage, they arrived at an identical room. The only strange thing was that the bull's head had transformed into its hindquarters. Even stranger, outside the hotel, there was a lobby and a reception desk. On the reception desk was a piece of paper with a reminder in Japanese not to ring the doorbell. During her search for her son, Lila inadvertently revealed Stan's true identity. It turned out Stan wasn't their son. He was the son of Lila's best friend. Lila had lied to Diego because she wanted to test whether he could be a good father. As a result, Diego Diego was furious, left but quickly discovered he couldn't get out of the hotel. Every time he went out through one door, he came back in through another, so he ran to ring the doorbell. Immediately, the hotel experienced a tremor. At this moment, both of them became alert. Immediately afterward, a scythe suddenly flew towards them. Before Diego could understand what was happening, 2 of his fingers were severed. Then, a terrifying figure holding the scythe approached them. The 2, terrified, immediately fled. The assailant was still in close pursuit. Fortunately, they were eventually able to return to the hotel through a secret tunnel. The scythe-wielding assailant didn't pursue them in that direction. Just then, Stan suddenly appeared before them. It turned out he had only gone out to buy snacks, but before they could say anything, the shockwave from the light beam struck again. This time, Stan truly vanished right before their eyes. Meanwhile, Luther and Sloane were about to have breakfast, but just then, Faye arrived. She said that the 2 of them had been too noisy last night and needed to go downstairs to talk. However, when Luther went downstairs, Ben only said that he wanted Luther to join Sparrow Academy. Ben even promised to treat him like family. This left Luther feeling somewhat confused. He didn't know how to make a choice. At this moment, Klaus had secretly gone to Sparrow Academy to visit Reginald. Meanwhile, Reginald regained his senses thanks to the methods Klaus had taught him. Hearing about Klaus's experiences in the underworld, Reginald planned to help Klaus activate his abilities. At the same time, Allison took Harlan to an abandoned construction site. A short while later, Victor arrived. They prepared to perform the power transfer. Harlan said that Victor had to listen carefully in order to receive the power from him. However, Victor found he couldn't concentrate. Harlan then activated his energy, causing it to envelop Victor. This action, however, caused Victor a terrible headache. Seeing that Victor was about to collapse, Allison used her linguistic abilities to stop Harlan. As a result, Harlan was unable to transfer the power to Victor. Allison's actions angered Harlan greatly. To avoid being bothered by Allison, Victor told her to go get some fresh air. Then Victor and Harlan continued to transfer energy. A moment later, the sky turned black. They floated in the air, connected to each other. Along with the powerful energy emanating from Harlan's mouth, yellow particles began to spew out. Finally, these energy particles were absorbed by Victor, who acquired Harlan's superpowers. With a terrifying explosion, they crashed heavily to the ground. After a period of exhaustion, both were very tired. When Harlan regained consciousness, he inadvertently told Allison that he had killed her mother and hoped for her forgiveness. Unexpectedly, this harmed him. Allison decided to take revenge immediately. That evening, she drove to Sparrow Academy and gave Ben a big gift. In the trunk of the car was Harlan, who had stopped breathing. When Ben saw the body of his enemy, he was very pleased and decided to cooperate with Umbrella Academy. 5 found out that Diego had had 2 fingers severed by a stranger, so he immediately went upstairs. To check the situation, he quickly discovered the secret passage behind it. He believed this was definitely related to the forgetfulness plan. Therefore, 5 decided to investigate thoroughly. At this point, Diego reminded him that the area behind that room was very dangerous. It was best for them to discuss things carefully. Meanwhile, Reginald and Sloane had invited the 3 of them to a meeting. Now the 2 academies were officially affiliated. Victor had also arrived. Allison voluntarily admitted that she had killed Harlan. She also revealed the truth that Harlan had killed the mothers of the Umbrella Academy members. As soon as this truth was known, no one sided with Harlan anymore. Victor questioned Allison about how she knew Harlan killed their mothers. Allison said that he himself had confessed. Then Allison and Victor continued to argue about their past conflicts. However, in these arguments, Victor was basically no match for Allison. Victor was so stressed he was almost suffocating. Seeing the situation was getting out of hand, the Academy members quickly tried to restrain Allison. Fortunately, Victor managed to break free from Allison's manipulation. He went to his room to compose himself. Next, everyone went to the basement to study the light sphere. According to calculations, the light sphere would emit energy again in 3 hours. Therefore, they decided to take advantage of this time to proceed with the Dyson Sphere project. This plan still required Victor's abilities. That's why Ben personally went to Victor's room to talk to him. Finally, he convinced Victor to step forward and help. Meanwhile, Reginald regained consciousness. He and Klaus went to the roadside to help him practice his resurrection ability before the apocalypse. The training method was very simple and brutal. Klaus was repeatedly hit by cars and killed. Klaus wanted to train to make his resurrection time faster, and indeed he was finally able to resurrect in just a few seconds. Reginald then took Klaus to the cemetery to help him overcome his childhood fears. However, Klaus remained terrified and ran away at the sight of ghosts. With Reginald's constant encouragement, Klaus finally managed to emit a burst of light energy on his own. Immediately, the surrounding ghosts vanished. Meanwhile, the others gathered in the basement to prepare to bring the sphere of light outside. The Dyson sphere atmosphere plan was incredibly simple. First, Victor and Lila would build an energy field to envelop the sphere of light. Then Sloane would compress it. Finally, the mysterious cube would seal the sphere of light and shrink it. The process went very smoothly. With the efforts of many people, the ball of light gradually shrank. But at this moment, the robot mother attacked them with a flamethrower. It turned out she didn't want them to seal her god. At the critical moment, Five appeared and broke the neck of his robot mother. Meanwhile, the ball of light was suppressed into a small sphere. The magic cube quickly absorbed it inside. The explosion from the ball of light soon returned, but now it was neutralized by the magic cube. The plan had succeeded. The two academies celebrated together. The atmosphere was extremely joyful and harmonious. However, Allison and Victor didn't feel very happy. At this time, Luther used a moonstone to make a ring to propose to Sloane. Lila also frankly told Diego about what she had gone through. It turned out that Lila was actually pregnant with his child. She then went to West Berlin in 1989 before the fall of the Berlin Wall. There she met Stan's mother. The mother had abandoned her son and gone off with another man for a week, so Lila took Stan to America and incidentally tested Diego's loyalty. However, Diego's care for Stan proved he was a good father. Therefore, Lila could confidently marry Diego. Meanwhile, Five spoke with Victor, hoping he wouldn't blame himself for Harlan's death and let darkness engulf his soul. He explained that sometimes protecting others requires sacrifice. Meanwhile, Ben was plotting something with Faye. It turned out Faye had planned to assassinate someone from the Umbrella Academy the next morning. However, Ben didn't support this action, as he and Reginald had other plans and needed the Umbrella Academy's help. Faye was very unhappy about this, so she decided to cooperate with the magic cube. As a result, the moment her glass touched the cube, it suddenly shook violently. It seemed unable to contain the ball of light inside any longer. Faye sensed something was wrong and quickly stepped forward to calm it down. However, the next second, the cube exploded on the spot. The ball of light once again escaped, and Faye was instantly swallowed by it. Not only that, the ball of light expanded even more than before. The entire Sparrow Academy headquarters was engulfed. The members fled in terror. Five narrowly escaped death. He even successfully rescued Ben, but now the world was completely destroyed. They were also trapped in the hotel with nowhere to go. This time, Five declared that he was tired and would only stand aside without saving the world anymore. At the same time, he told everyone to quickly fulfill their wishes before the apocalypse. Upon hearing this, Luther immediately stood up along with Sloane. He announces to everyone that the two are engaged and planning to get married before the apocalypse. Meanwhile, Reginald and Klaus have just returned, but at this point, everyone has chosen to give up the fight. This greatly displeases Reginald, so he tries to encourage everyone to save the world. However, Five reveals his oblivion plan to everyone, pointing out that Reginald only wants them to undertake a dangerous mission where they could die at any moment. He criticizes Reginald as a madman and a cruel person, and that he has gambled their lives on a meaningless mission. The story returns to 1988 when Reginald was on an expedition in the wilderness. He found a mysterious portal in midair. To prevent anyone from discovering this secret, he decided to build a building around the portal, and that's how the Obsidian Hotel was born. After the hotel was built, Reginald led a group of mercenaries to the Water Buffalo room. They tried to search for something behind the door, but the mercenaries lost their voices after entering. When Reginald opened the secret door again, he discovered that the entire group had been wiped out. From then on, Reginald decided to adopt people with superpowers in order to find a way to open the door. Therefore, he established an academy for them. After knowing about the forgetfulness plan, everyone split into two factions. Only Ben and Klaus sided with Reginald. Everyone else was on the opposing side. Witnessing this situation, Klaus could only pull Reginald away first. That evening, Luther and Sloane's wedding was held on schedule. Klaus officiated. In front of everyone, Luther and Sloane officially became husband and wife. The atmosphere in the hotel was a stark contrast to the gloomy world outside. Everyone was trying to enjoy this peaceful time before the apocalypse. At this point, Victor took the initiative to apologize to Allison. He tried to mend their relationship. However, Allison's soul was shrouded in darkness. She couldn't forgive Victor, nor could she admit her own wrongdoing. Suddenly, Reginald appeared. Everyone felt uneasy, but his demeanor exceeded everyone's expectations. Reginald not only shed his usual arrogant attitude, but he also delivered a very moving speech to the bride and groom. Outside, the beam of light continued to destroy the world. Everyone ran to the rooftop to witness the apocalypse. Ben was drunk. He no longer had his usual aggressive appearance. The 8 of them stood together like a big family. Then, Five, drunk, went into the hotel. Unexpectedly, as he passed the Water Buffalo room, Ben accidentally discovered Reginald talking to a mysterious person. However, before he could clarify the situation, he fell asleep in the elevator. The next day, everyone woke up from their drunken stupor. Reginald immediately invited them to a family meeting. He told them about the legend of the 7 bells. According to this legend, after the Creator created the universe, he preserved the universe's structure through a portal. Through long research, Reginald had located the portal. It was in a secret space within a forgotten hotel. The stranger who cut off Diego's finger was the guardian of the portal. Because the guardian was very powerful, everyone had to join forces to prevent the world's destruction. At this point, Allison suddenly sided with Reginald. She encouraged everyone to join in saving the world. 5 recalled the images he had seen the night before. Therefore, he suggested holding a vote to make a final decision. During the vote, Allison behaved very unusually. She came to apologize to Victor and simultaneously try to persuade him to side with her. However, Victor noticed her unusual behavior, so he didn't agree immediately. Finally, the voting results were announced. Reginald's idea was not approved. Furthermore, his plan required 7 people to complete. In the end, Reginald had no choice but to give up. Everyone returned to their rooms to await the approaching apocalypse. On his way back to his room, Luther saw Reginald sitting thoughtfully. He intended to comfort Reginald a little, but he didn't know that this action would put him in danger shortly afterward. Reginald embraced Luther gratefully. He told Luther that the best way for a family to unite was to hold a wedding or a funeral. They had already had a wedding, so now it was time for the other event. Having said that, he didn't hesitate to stab Luther. At this point, he revealed his alien body. Meanwhile, 5 was discussing with Victor what he had seen the previous night, but he couldn't remember the mysterious person Reginald had spoken to. Victor then mentioned Allison's unusual behavior. This reminder finally brought 5 back to the whole scene. It turned out the mysterious person who had spoken to Reginald was Allison. Just then, a scream for help rang out. Sloane had discovered Luther's body. Very quickly, the others rushed over. They saw knife wounds on Luther's body, so they suspected that the gatekeeper had gone out and attacked Luther. Reginald then appeared, pretending not to know what had happened. Outside, a ball of light was beginning to engulf the hotel. In this critical situation, everyone was at a loss. Reginald seized the opportunity to tell everyone to quickly escape through the secret passage. With no other choice, they could only abandon Luther's body and run through the portal. Unexpectedly, at the last minute, Reginald stopped Klaus. The reason was that Klaus was no longer of any use to them. Reginald kicked Klaus to the ground and quickly closed the secret passage. Seeing himself about to be surrounded by smoke and fire, Klaus deliberately jumped onto the horns of the water buffalo. He preferred to end his own life rather than let the ball of light destroy him. Meanwhile, the others had already gone through the tunnel to the Obsidian Hotel. Reginald was the last to arrive. He informed everyone that Klaus hadn't managed to escape and had been swallowed by the ball of light. He even pretended to apologize for not being able to save Klaus. However, 5 insisted that Klaus was right behind him when he entered the tunnel. He wanted to go back to the other side to find his teammates, but Reginald said there was nothing left on the other side. He urged everyone to continue moving toward the main hall. Diego reminded everyone not to ring the bell. Now they had to figure out how to deal with the guard before luring him out. While everyone was discussing, Reginald was studying something nearby. 5's suspicions grew as he watched Reginald's behavior. He felt everyone was falling into Reginald's trap. He suspected Allison and Reginald had conspired to kill Luther and Klaus, but they had no evidence yet. In the underworld, Luther and Klaus were eating and watching television. Since Klaus had chosen to end his own life, he could easily reach the underworld. Luther recalled the scene of his death. He worried that Reginald would harm everyone. He urgently urged Klaus to return quickly to warn the others. However, Klaus was disheartened by Reginald's betrayal. He just wanted to rest. Luther angrily beat him up. Finally, he managed to convince Klaus. Meanwhile, Allison was questioning Reginald. She asked if he had killed Luther and Klaus. Although they had collaborated, the murder was not part of her plan. Reginald repeatedly denied it, insisting he would help her fulfill her promise. He then told everyone that to reset the universe, they needed to find 7 symbols on the drawing. He then divided everyone into 2 teams to search the entire hotel. Meanwhile, he used the excuse of forgetting his notebook to stay in the lobby. 5 seized this opportunity to question Allison, asking if she was plotting something with Reginald. Allison didn't dare answer, so she left the room. Victor immediately chased after her. At that moment, the hallway changed again. When 5 came out, he discovered that the 3rd floor had become the 5th floor. This greatly confused him. Then Allison and Victor also realized that 5 had disappeared. They immediately turned back to look for him. Meanwhile, Diego also noticed that something was wrong with the hotel. In just a few seconds, he and Lila had gone from the 6th floor to the 8th floor. It seemed everyone was trapped in the hotel hallway. Meanwhile, Klaus had revived and appeared in the lobby, so he met Reginald again. Seeing his plot exposed, Reginald became enraged and knocked Klaus unconscious. Immediately, he decided decisively pressed the bell. The entire hotel experienced a strong tremor. The guards were released once again. The first to be attacked were Allison and Victor. A warrior wielding an axe suddenly rushed out from within the wall. He swung a blow at Allison. She didn't have time to react. Immediately, her arm was severed. At the critical moment, Victor unleashed his energy and sent the fighter flying. Meanwhile, Five encountered Sloane and Ben. Before they could understand what was happening, a swordsman suddenly appeared. Sloane believed he was Luther's murderer and decisively charged into battle. Five also grabbed his axe and charged forward. However, they were no match for the fighter and were successively defeated. Ben finally decided to attack, summoning his tentacles to bind the enemy. However, within seconds, the fighter severed his tentacles. At that moment, Five struck the fighter's weak point with his axe, causing him to fall dead instantly. On the other side, Diego encountered the scythe-wielding fighter again. The two tried to attack him with throwing stars, but this tactic proved ineffective. Fortunately, the elevator doors opened, allowing them to escape to the 4th floor. While fleeing, Diego locked Lila in a room while he lured the enemy away. Victor and Allison hid in the bathroom. Taking advantage of the situation, Allison confessed to Victor that she did indeed have a deal with Reginald. However, she knew nothing about the murders. At that moment, the axe-wielding warrior arrived. During the fight, the hotel was altered, separating Victor and Allison. Victor inadvertently walked past the room where Lila was being held. Thanks to Victor's abilities, Lila was freed. The axe-wielding warrior also arrived, but this time they had no intention of fleeing. They unleashed 2 energy waves together, successfully killing the warrior. After the battle, everyone safely returned to the main hall. Klaus had also woken up. He recounted Reginald's actions to everyone. Upon finding out the truth, everyone was extremely angry. They rushed to confront Reginald, and a heated argument ensued in the main hall. Meanwhile, Five noticed a familiar drawing on the floor and quickly ran upstairs to investigate. Sure enough, the star map on the floor corresponded to the 7 symbols in the drawing. Suddenly, a scythe-wielding warrior descended from the sky. Instantly, everyone was overwhelmed and unable to react. Five lost an arm. The others were quickly subdued as well. Finally, only Sloane remained. Just as the scythe-wielding warrior was about to finish her off, Luther, from behind, restrained the enemy. It turned out Klaus had activated his power to bring Luther back to the human world. Unfortunately, Klaus's power didn't last long. Luther hastily bid farewell to Sloane and disappeared. The scythe-wielding warrior rose again and charged towards them. Five told everyone to stand on the star-shaped positions on the floor. Allison wanted to join the formation but was stopped by Reginald. Five quickly ran to the empty space. Instantly, the 7 of them connected. A beam of light shot from Five's body and struck the warrior in the chest. Finally, they had eliminated the Guardian, and the universe recreating device appeared before them. He rushed to operate the machine. Meanwhile, everyone else was unable to move. A moment later, their faces turned pale. The yellow energy particles in their bodies were being sucked out. It turned out that the substance to activate the machine was their own superpowers. This was Reginald's plot. He had decided to sacrifice his 7 adopted children to recreate the universe. Seeing this, Allison decided to save them. She raised her scythe and slashed at Reginald. As a result, half of his head was severed, but what flowed out was not blood, but a kind of blue liquid. Finally, Reginald died right in front of the control panel. At this moment, the conditions were met to recreate the universe. On the virtual screen, the blue start button was flashing. She raised her finger to press it. Victor tried to stop Allison but then couldn't bring himself to harm her. In the final moment, Allison pressed the activation button. The next second, the universe began the recreation process. Allison returned home by taxi. This time, she was reunited with her daughter as she had wished. Someone walked past behind her. When she turned around, she was moved to realize it was her boyfriend. The others also returned to reality, but this was no longer the Obsidian Hotel, but had become Obsidian Park. Luther had also been resurrected, and his body was back to normal. But at this moment, he discovered that Sloane had disappeared. At the same time, Five's severed arm and Diego's finger had grown back. However, they had lost all their superpowers. Faced with this situation, each person had a different thought. Luther wanted to go find Sloane, while Ben turned and left. Diego was also planning to go on a date with Lila. Only Victor remained, standing and looking at Reginald's statue. At this moment, Reginald and his recently resurrected wife stood high above, observing everything. Long ago, Reginald had a wife who loved him dearly. However, she died of a serious illness. Reginald longed to have his wife resurrected, so he planned to recreate the universe. The condition for this recreation was the sacrifice of 7 people possessing superpowers. Therefore, he unleashed his superpowers throughout the world. Many women became pregnant and gave birth on the same day. Reginald selected 7 children from among them to nurture. However, the disappearance of Five and the death of Ben made his plan impossible to carry out. In the end, he had no choice but to take his wife's body to the moon to wait for another opportunity. opportunity. Reginald sent Luther to the moon to protect his wife's body. Because Reginald was not dead in the current timeline, this plan was feasible. Allison, knowing about this plan, agreed to cooperate. Allison was finally reunited with her loved ones in the new universe. Sloane and Ben's situation was somewhat unusual. Perhaps Reginald didn't adopt people with superpowers in the new universe. Therefore, Sloane wasn't with the Umbrella Academy. Meanwhile, there were two Bens coexisting in the new universe. 6 years passed quickly. Each had their own life. Luther was now a dancer at a nightclub, though his body didn't seem as strong as it used to be. Diego, on the other hand, was a delivery man. He used to be able to easily control flying objects, but now even throwing a package could cause him to accidentally break someone's window. To finish his work on time, he didn't even have time to get out of the car to use the restroom. He could only relieve himself in a bottle right there in the car. He worked so hard because he and Lila had officially started a family and had 3 children together. However, daily life caused increasing discord between him and his wife. Lila, being a former secret agent, couldn't stand the monotonous family life. Allison continued her career as a celebrity to earn money for her family, but she no longer possessed the power of verbal hypnosis. Currently, she could only take on jobs like filming laundry detergent commercials. Klaus no longer had to deal with ghosts, so his life became more peaceful. He also stopped drinking and using drugs. Every day he took care of Allison's daughter, the most hardworking farmers. 5 got a job at the CIA, working as a spy. Ben had just been released from prison for cryptocurrency manipulation. Victor opened a small pub in Canada, and now he no longer lost control of his emotions. Many people have their memories altered over time, but they still retain their earlier memories. After Jen confirmed that those memories weren't a dream, he and his wife formed a secret organization called the Guardians. Their goal was to restore the life they once knew. They called this group the Queens, each with a unique tattoo on their arm. One day, after Victor finished his shift at a bar in Canada, he was attacked by a stranger. Following the incident, Victor wrote an anonymous letter to his former comrades, instructing them to go to a laundromat at the address in the letter to rescue him. When they arrived, they found Victor tied to a chair, unharmed. The man who kidnapped Victor appeared, but he didn't seem intimidating. It turned out his daughter had gone missing, and he had found traces of her among the remaining belongings. At the same time, he also saw superheroes in old newspapers, so he hoped the members of the Umbrella Academy could help him find his daughter. Everyone looked at each other in confusion, because at this point, they had lost all their superpowers. They were just ordinary people. However, after looking at the box, Ben decided to accept the mission. His teammates immediately looked puzzled. 5 told his father that they needed 24 hours because the box contained a vial of cosmic particles called Paul Marigold, and this substance was the source of their powers. Just a little bit would restore their superpowers. However, because their superpowers had always caused apocalypses in the past, they were all hesitant about whether to regain their powers or not. While no one was looking, Ben secretly slipped the vial of cosmic particles into his pocket. When no one was paying attention, he poured them into the glasses of wine. Only Klaus, who had quit drinking, secretly poured the wine away. Next morning, everyone discovered they had regained their superpowers. Luther felt energized while pole dancing. He ripped off his shirt, revealing his muscular gorilla-like physique. He couldn't believe it. It was unbelievable. Diego, on the other hand, was throwing with absolute accuracy. He was incredibly excited. When 5 stood up, he found himself transported to a strange place. Realizing the anomaly, everyone returned to the dilapidated Umbrella Academy. Lila accidentally copied someone's superpower. She nearly decapitated everyone with her laser beam. Victor felt furious at regaining his superpowers, as it had taken him 5 years to build a life without them. His emotions began to spiral out of control. When Victor saw Ben descending with his octopus tentacles, he immediately lunged at Ben and started beating him up. Only Klaus found the situation amusing because he hadn't drunk alcohol to regain his powers. In any case, they now had no choice but to go back to They wanted to know what the man who had lost his daughter was really plotting, but when they arrived, they found the place empty. Only a map with a red circle remained. Clearly, that was the location the man wanted them to go to. To clarify the situation, everyone decided to drive there. After 3 long days, they finally arrived at a small town. Except for Klaus, who was still hesitant about whether to regain his powers, everyone else entered the town and split up. Luther, Allison, Victor formed one group. Diego and his wife, along with 5, formed another. Ben acted alone. Initially, the town seemed normal. Everyone inquired about the whereabouts of the man. However, no one knew him. In a restaurant, Ben met Jennifer, the person they had been assigned to search for. Jennifer insisted she didn't know the man and that she wasn't his daughter. Meanwhile, 5, out on the street, also noticed something unusual. He noticed a strangely dressed young man staring at them. He immediately immediately warned his two companions. On the other side, Allison, walking around the antique shop, also noticed something unusual. Suddenly, the whole town stared at them. In the eerie atmosphere, Victor spotted an old woman in a wheelchair loading a shotgun. Immediately afterward, the old woman directly attacked Victor. When Victor used his superpowers to retaliate, everyone in the town started drawing their guns and attacking them. 5 quickly teleported away to escape. Meanwhile, a group of strangers approached and dragged Jennifer away. Ben tried to stop them, but was immediately electrocuted, causing his tentacles to suddenly appear. Jennifer was a little frightened, but for some reason, she still felt a special affection for this man. She stepped in to protect him. As Ben fled, Jennifer chased after him. In the square, Diego and his wife were still running from the hail of bullets. Luckily, they found cover. After a brief argument, Diego stood up and used his ability to control the bullets around him. He then deflected all the bullets back at the attackers, instantly taking down all the gunmen. Suddenly, a surviving gunman pointed his gun at Diego from behind. However, at that moment, 2 laser beams shot out and instantly cut the gunman in half. Diego immediately praised his wife. Meanwhile, Klaus was feeling very dejected in the car. Suddenly he spotted a woman running towards him in a panic from a distance. He thought it was the daughter of the man they were looking for. He told himself how lucky he was to have waited there. At that moment, Jennifer and Ben were also running back. The woman's identity was revealed. She immediately pulled out a gun and shot Klaus. Diego and his wife, having just arrived, were horrified to see Klaus lying on the ground. The culprit, taking advantage of everyone's distraction, kidnapped Jennifer, but Ben used his tentacles to pierce her throat. Everyone surrounded Klaus. His superpowers were summoning spirits and resurrecting them, but he hadn't regained them yet, so he was just an ordinary person. Everyone quickly helped Klaus into a car and left the dangerous place. Meanwhile, 5 had teleported to a strange subway station. Seeing the empty train cars, he curiously boarded one. When he reached the final station, he found his way out and discovered he was back in town. Only, the town now looked very peaceful, with no trace of the previous chaos. He realized the subway had transported him to a different time, so he quickly ran back to the train. Luther's group in the original timeline was also facing a hail of bullets. Luther used his muscular body to shield Allison and Victor from the bullets. Taking advantage of the enemy's reloading, Victor unleashed a sonic wave, taking down several opponents. Allison also used her new abilities to control a sniper. He lost control, shot his teammates, and ended his own life. But at that moment, a sniper in a Santa Claus costume appeared with a large machine gun. Worse still, 5 happened to teleport right into their firing range. The group could only duck to avoid the bullets. Luther seemed on the verge of collapse. Diego drove the van forward and took down the last sniper. Then the group quickly got into the van and left town. In the van, Klaus had fainted, looking like he was about to breathe his last. Having no other choice, they gave Klaus a drop of Marigot. Klaus immediately woke up. Now all members of Team Umbrella had regained their superpowers. Just as they breathed a sigh of relief, a car suddenly crashed into their vehicle. In the chaos, no one noticed that when Ben and Jennifer's hands touched, strange sparks appeared. Driver of the car was the founder of the Guardians organization. While everyone was still unconscious, Jen and his wife kidnapped Jennifer. Ben woke up feeling dizzy. He could only watch the car drive away. When everyone was fully awake, they continued arguing, especially Klaus. He complained that they hadn't let him die peacefully. After a long tirade, Klaus angrily left. The remaining people decided to split up and act once again. Luther's group searched for his adoptive father, Reginald, in this timeline to find more clues. Diego and his wife, along with 5, searched for Jen based on information received from the CIA. Meanwhile, Ben continued to act alone. After their previous encounter, Ben seemed to have developed a strange ability. His arm began to turn red. At the same time, Jennifer also experienced similar symptoms on her arm. Jennifer was no ordinary person. Since childhood, she had been pulled from a giant squid. The reaction between her and Ben held a secret that could destroy the universe. This was also the reason the Guardians had kidnapped Jennifer. Meanwhile, Ben was wandering the streets. Unexpectedly, he encountered the man they had been searching for. The man revealed Jennifer's location to Ben. In reality, he only wanted to separate Ben and Jennifer from the others in the team. Meanwhile, Diego was searching for clues in Jen's house. On the other side, Lila and 5 had teleported back to the subway station they had been to before. Together, they began a journey through time. When they returned, Diego discovered a notebook. The notes revealed that Ben and Jennifer shared a strange, fated connection. Meanwhile, Luther's group arrived at the home of his foster father, Reginald. This was their first meeting with Abigail, Reginald's wife. However, since Reginald in this timeline wasn't their foster father, he couldn't answer many of their questions. They were forced to use a device to explore possibly altered memories in Reginald's mind. They returned to their childhood when they were on an urgent urgent mission. Initially, the mission was just to destroy a container, but Ben opened the container on his own initiative and discovered Jennifer inside. Despite warnings, he decided to rescue her. As they held hands, a bond formed. Unexpectedly, as the group prepared to retreat, Reginald from behind killed both Ben and Jennifer. Only then did they know the truth. They angrily condemned their foster father, but Reginald tried to explain to them that the culprit was another Reginald from a different timeline. Abigail explained that she had once created a cosmic particle called Marigold, which was what gave them their superpowers. However, she had also inadvertently created another particle called Durango. If these two particles combined, they would destroy the entire universe. Jennifer carried the Durango particle, so when she came into contact with Ben, who carried the Marigold particle, they would be attracted to each other, causing the destruction of the world. Therefore, in the previous timeline, Reginald killed them before they had a chance to combine. In the current timeline, it seems someone deliberately orchestrated the encounter, causing Ben and Jennifer to be attracted to each other. Everyone immediately sensed the seriousness of the situation. Ben set off to find Jennifer, but Klaus had left alone beforehand. Since Klaus's superpowers had recovered, he had reverted to his previous dreamy state. Now he craved drugs and other stimulants again. He sought out his old drug dealer. However, he forgot that he owed the drug dealer a large sum of money. The drug dealer became very angry after exchanging a few words with Klaus. He pulled out a gun and shot Klaus dead on the spot, but Klaus revived immediately. The drug dealer then realized his opportunity to make money. He locked Klaus up and began offering special spiritual services. Soon his first client arrived. This woman had recently become a widow, but she missed her husband terribly, so she came to Klaus hoping to see him again. Klaus used his foot to switch on the electric fan under the table. Then he began to summon the spirit of her deceased husband. Indeed, the woman's husband appeared. Thanks to this, Klaus discovered a secret between the two of them. At this point, the woman completely trusted Klaus. She excitedly asked him if she could touch her husband. Klaus pointed to the ATM in the lobby and announced that the full service cost $500. The woman said she had enough cash, so Klaus allowed her husband's spirit to enter his body. The woman, seeing his eyes and demeanor, immediately recognized him as her deceased husband. They embraced emotionally. Klaus earned $500 in just half an hour. However, shortly afterward, the drug dealer stole the money. A few days later, Klaus could no longer bear his captivity, but he had no way to escape. Frustrated, he discovered the same customer had returned. This time, however, the woman not only wanted to chat, but also wanted her husband to reveal where he had hidden the money. Although her husband refused to speak, Klaus saw his memories. He saw that her husband had buried the money under the grave of their dog, Piggy. However, he didn't tell his wife about this. Instead, he lied, saying the money had been deposited in the bank and the password was the dog's name. He even asked his wife for a brooch to try and unlock the door. After she left, he pried open the window and escaped. That night, Klaus dug up Piggy's grave and found a bag of money inside. But unexpectedly, he fell into a trap. The customer had guessed his plan beforehand. It turned out that her deceased husband never deposited money in the bank. Faced with a gun, Klaus had no choice but to hand over the money. The drug dealer who had held him captive before also arrived. He also wanted to steal the money. Knowing that a fight was about to break out, Klaus hid inside the coffin. Gunshots immediately rang out. Above, after a while, he looked up. Before him were only corpses lying on the ground. However, the drug dealer was still alive. He snatched the bag of money and punched Klaus, causing him to fall into the coffin. Then he filled it with earth and buried Klaus alive. The problem was, Klaus couldn't die. Now he was completely sealed inside. Meanwhile, Ben had arrived at the place where Jennifer was being held captive. Looking at the small farm, he extended his tentacles. Inside the farm, Jennifer was also trying to escape from the barn. The guard was dozing off. When he opened his eyes, the scene before him was horrific. Ben had slaughtered everyone in his way. The place looked like a battlefield, littered with corpses. The last guard was thrown far away by the tentacles. When Ben broke down the door and found Jennifer, two more soldiers suddenly appeared and opened fire on them. Ben and Jennifer quickly fled. The two soldiers were also shot dead by Jen and his wife shortly afterward. Clearly, the combination of Ben and Jennifer was a plan they had devised from the beginning. Therefore, losing a few useless soldiers in the organization didn't have much of an impact. The next day, the entire Umbrella Academy and the CIA arrived at the scene. Seeing the scene before them, everyone realized the situation was getting worse. Each person began to think of ways to solve the problem. Lila came up with the idea of using 5 to travel through time. She wanted to go back to the past to prevent the bond between Ben and Jennifer. Meanwhile, Luther and Diego were limited in their abilities, so they couldn't do much. Therefore, 5 asked her superiors at the CIA for help. Allison, having been away from home for a while, decided to visit her daughter first. first. Victor, having been saved by Ben's spirit, decided to go directly. To save him, he planned to go with Reginald to find Ben and bring him back. So everyone continued to act individually. At this time, Ben and Jennifer had fled to a small town. The two felt increasingly attracted to each other. Initially, they stayed in separate single rooms. However, at midnight, Jennifer could no longer restrain herself. She knocked on Ben's door and quickly merged with him. The radiation emitted from the fusion of the two types of particles caused the nearby hotel staff to vomit black liquid, and he died instantly. The longer Ben and Jennifer stayed together, the more destructive power they possessed. Five and Lila boarded a train to travel through different timelines, but no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't find the original timeline. Luckily, travel time wasn't counted in real time. Therefore, before the destruction occurred, they had unlimited time to search. A year passed quickly. Now they had traced countless timelines, yet they still couldn't find anything. By the third year, their faces were weary. During their search, they began to distract themselves with other pleasures. By the fourth year, as they continued to be together, they gradually focused more on each other and became increasingly close. By the fifth year, they began to lean on each other when tired. By the sixth year, they were sleeping in each other's arms. Finally, after 7 years of fruitless searching, they decided to give up. But the worst part was, they were lost. Both men felt exhausted. They sought out an abandoned timeline to rest. Although they had spent 7 years on their quest, only 1 day had passed in reality. Diego was completely unaware that his wife was having an affair. At this moment, Diego and Luther, confidently dressed in suits, walked into CIA headquarters. They were about to achieve their dream of becoming agents. However, their boss led them to a department no one wanted to go to. This was a place for former agents who had made mistakes. They lived only to await their demise. Yet, the benefits of this department were still very attractive. One time, Luther sneaked into his boss's office. He began searching around, hoping to find something valuable. However, he was caught red-handed by his boss. Initially, the situation wasn't serious, but at this point, the entire CIA had been infiltrated by members of the Space Annihilation Protection Organization. Luther and Diego were, of course, also targets, so the two had a fierce battle with the CIA agents. In another development, Allison returned home to visit her daughter. From her daughter's words, she found out that Klaus hadn't returned home yet. At this point, she realized he was in trouble, so she decided to rescue Klaus immediately. Allison guessed that when Klaus regained his superpowers, the first thing he would seek out would be drugs, so she went to the drug dealer's place to find him. Allison kicked down the door and stormed into the enemy's base. Unexpectedly, she was ambushed by the drug dealer. However, she immediately used her superpowers to pin him against the wall. She also conveniently destroyed his base. After finding out where Klaus was being held, Allison and her daughter rushed to the cemetery. Klaus was suffering terribly in his cramped coffin, being tormented by the ghost of the coffin's owner. He tried to summon another ghost to help him, but his efforts were in vain. However, the banging on the wooden coffin alerted Allison to his whereabouts. Without further ado, Allison used a shovel to dig him out. Finally, she and her daughter managed to pull Klaus out of the grave. Meanwhile, Five and Lila were still traveling through different timelines. Five searched for food every day and skillfully crafted a bracelet for Lila. One day, Five went out to gather supplies as usual. He unexpectedly discovered a notebook hidden beneath the subway. It was a notebook he had written in another timeline, containing instructions on how to return to reality. He should have been happy to find it, but when he saw Lila approaching, he hid the notebook. Five understood that once they returned to the real world, he would lose this relationship. So, months passed here. During dinner, Lila gave Five a box of coffee. Five was touched and took out the notebook to give it to her. Lila immediately wanted to return to her husband and children. Compared to Five, her family was far more important. The two immediately disagreed. Five couldn't convince Lila, so they returned to the old timeline. In reality, only a few hours had passed. Diego had just returned from a fight at the CIA. Seeing his wife return, he was overjoyed and hugged her. That evening, the entire Umbrella Academy group gathered together again. Only Victor was currently searching for Ben with Dr. Reginald. The gathering initially went quite harmoniously. Luther and Diego even proudly boasted that they had discovered that the entire CIA was a member of the Guardians, and they dealt with all of them. However, Five wasn't very receptive. He was still consumed by grief. He even used a sarcastic tone to criticize everyone. Many of those present felt uncomfortable. When Lila tried to reason with Five, he continued to utter harsh words. Diego, not understanding the situation, immediately became angry with his teammate. Diego and Five then confronted each other. Those around them sensed that things were getting tense. Lila stepped forward to separate them, but at that moment, Diego noticed the bracelet on her hand. He wondered why she was wearing it when she had previously said she hated wearing bracelets. Lila replied that she didn't hate wearing bracelets, but Diego countered that she had hated the bracelet he gave her for Valentine's Day so much that she had traded it for a vacuum cleaner. Everyone around was incredibly surprised. Lila and Five showed bewildered expressions. Immediately, Diego and the others also realized something between the two. Five then didn't hesitate to reveal the truth. Shocking everyone, Lila also had to confess what had happened over the past 7 years. Everyone had traveled through time before, so they understood the feeling of emptiness in that endless period. The room suddenly fell silent. Just then, a news report on television mentioned Ben, breaking the silence. However, the danger posed by Ben and Jennifer remained the most worrying. Each time they touched each other, the reaction in their bodies intensified. Victor and Reginald had found a hotel employee who had died from the combined reaction between Ben and Jennifer. They wanted to prevent the two from continuing to combine. However, the Guardians organization constantly obstructed Victor and Reginald. Thanks to his abilities, Victor overcame the dangers. But the Guardians organization seemed to have unlimited manpower. This organization grew so powerful thanks to a mysterious figure with a long beard. Although Jen and his wife directly led the organization, the members, including themselves, regained their memories thanks to this long-bearded man. He was no longer satisfied with Jen and his wife's performance, so he decided to kill Jen at the first opportunity. He then removed his mask, revealing his true identity. Abigail, the wife Reginald had tried to resurrect. Abigail then began removing Jen's organs from his body. Afterward, she emerged from behind the curtain in Jen's likeness. From this point on, she directly led the organization to ensure the universe's destruction. Her plan was now more than half successful. Meanwhile, prolonged contact between Ben and Jennifer had caused the particles in their bodies to become increasingly unstable, especially Jennifer's. This made her very uncomfortable. Ben had no choice but to stop the car and take her into a building. However, they were immediately discovered by the Guardians. Members of the Guardians surrounded the building from all sides, determined not to let the two escape. At the same time, they also prevented members of the Umbrella Academy from disrupting their so-called purification ceremony. However, with his abilities, Victor still managed to kill a guard in the alley. Then he sneaked into the building. By this time, Ben and Jennifer had been severely affected by the cosmic particles. They were so disfigured that they were unrecognizable. The sight before him shocked Victor. He still tried to persuade them to separate, but they refused. The best solution now was to kill one of them before the two types of particles completely combined. Victor knew that Reginald would not hesitate to do so. Therefore, he decided to extract the Durango particle from Ben's body and transfer it into his bobber. Meanwhile, the members of the Umbrella Academy arrived. They were horrified by the sight before them and hesitated to act rashly. However, Reginald couldn't let his emotions get the better of him. He ordered his sharpshooter to immediately kill Ben. The bullet, however, struck Five instead. It was too late. Under the influence of the two types of particles, Ben and Jennifer had completely merged. Now they had transformed into a gigantic monster, and it was still growing larger. The destruction of the world was only a matter of time. Everyone immediately attacked the monster, but because a part of it was still Ben, the members didn't dare use their full power. In the chaos, Five and Diego fought each other out of jealousy. The scene became more chaotic than ever. Worse still, their attacks had no effect on the monster anymore. It had grown to the ceiling. Lila stepped in to stop the fight between Five and Diego, informing them that it was over. Five sadly disappeared from the place. Outside, Reginald saw the monster destroy the building and escape. He knew that everything was beyond saving, so he bowed his head, accepting his fate of destruction once again. At this moment, Abigail approached and confessed everything. She believed that Reginald's release of cosmic particles into this world was a mistake. Although she understood that her husband did it to resurrect her, the continuous disasters made her feel extremely guilty, so she secretly planned to return the world to zero. Faced with his wife's confession, Sergeant had no choice but to accept it. The two watched the monster approach with its terrifying mouth wide open towards them. Meanwhile, Five sadly went to the subway. He traveled through time and was consumed by heartbreak. Then he accidentally wandered into a restaurant. Stepping inside, he was astonished to see versions of himself from different timelines. They had all tried to save the universe through numerous fractured timelines, but ultimately failed. One version of Five asked how many times they had saved the universe. Another replied, 145,412 times. Finally, Five understood the true cause of the universe's destruction: the chaos created by the existence of the 7 members of the Umbrella Academy. Five then returned to his teammates to explain the situation. Everyone understood and knew what they needed to do. They decided not to resist anymore. They held hands and waited for the thrilling appearance of cosmic particles. After the entire group was completely engulfed by the cosmic particles, the tangled timelines began to disappear. Everything that had happened ceased to exist. The timelines were finally rearranged into one. The world returned to its original state where no one possessed superpowers. All the members then appeared in a park. They laughed and chatted happily in a harmonious setting. The film ends here. Thank you for your interest and for watching. Goodbye, and see